It's great to see, I don't want to use the word old-timers, but it's great to see somebody associates of Don from years gone by. So my name is Dave Harrington. I have the privilege of serving as acting chair in the department right now and the special treat of emceeing this event. We come to honor Don. It's not often, actually, that the department takes the time to celebrate one of its own. And so this is going to be a great opportunity to do that. We're often so busy that we overlook that. People wind up getting awards all around the world and then never have anything done here. I have some special thanks before I get us rolling here to give first and especially to Tom Bellin, who's an alum. Tom was a co-organizer of this, and in fact, more than that, Tom was really the inspiration to get this rolling. And Tom was going to be here, but unfortunately he has a serious illness in his family and was unable to make it. And it really just turned very, very bad in the last week or so. And so that made it impossible for him to be here. But we have slides from Tom, and they will be delivered by a special guest who's here to fill in. I want to thank the speakers in advance for agreeing to come, some of whom have traveled quite some distance. Very, very nice. And I want to apologize to the speakers in advance for two things that will happen. One is all of the speakers are quite distinguished. And if I took the time to list their honors, we would never get through the program. And so I'll have very brief introductions to people, but not nearly commensurate with their achievements. Secondly, I will be the timekeeper from hell here, because Dale tells me that the worst of all possible things can happen. We're at risk of losing the reception if we go too late, so we don't want that to happen. And so we will make sure that that doesn't happen. I want to add a special thanks to the Department of Healthcare Policy, who provided partial support for this through Alan Soslavsky, who's also one of our speakers. Thank you very much. And then, of course, thanks to the staff. The staff in the department have really put a lot of time in organizing this event, especially Dale. Dale, stand up so we can recognize you. And is Betsy here yet? She's not here yet. Okay. So one of the things that's making us all a little nervous is that Dale's pending retirement means that we may never have another event again, because we're not sure how we can do these without Dale. So there will be many wonderful things said about Don today. I'm not going to steal anybody's thunder. There are lots of recognitions from the outside world. Fellow of just about everything one can be a fellow of, including the ISI, IMS, elected member of the ASA, elected member of the ISI, but also a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the National Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a long string of other things. I'll let other people add to that. Now, I asked myself, who does Don remind me of, or who most reminds me of Don outside the world of statistics? Because, of course, it's really important that folks from our discipline get the recognition they deserve outside and get mapped into the wider world. So there he is in all his lovely glory. He's a little less hair than he does in the picture of him at age 4, 5, something. Who does he remind me of? Well, Picasso. Now, Picasso for a couple of reasons. One is that Picasso was known for breaking the mold early on in the work that he did, and then having an enormous longevity in his work. And that's very much reminds me of Don, because in fact, the early work that Don did in causal inference, in multiple imputation, was all work that people said couldn't be done, just didn't exist. And he has stayed at it and stayed very busy. There is a special hero of mine, Ted Williams, who, those of us who are Bostonians, know Ted as a pure hitter. And I think of Don as the best pure thinker that I've ever met in statistics, the one who never really gets his eyes off the ball.
He looks more like Picasso.
Who is this last one, and why does this last one remind me of Don? Who is that last person? That is Janis Joplin. Why does Janis Joplin remind me of Don? Well, for a couple of reasons. Don, of course, is a car lover. Do we have audio here on this?
Lord, won't you buy me
So,
a Mercedes?
we all know that Dawn is a car
My
lover.
friends all drive Porsches. I must
But
make
even more
amends.
than a love for
Worked
Mercedes-Benz,
hard all my
one of the
lifetime,
things
no
that was
help
notable
from
about
my
someone like
friends.
Janis Joplin
So, oh Lord,
is that
won't you
when
buy
she was
me
popular,
a
her stuff was spurned.
Mercedes-Benz?
Her stuff was considered
Oh, Lord,
bizarre,
won't you buy
not
me
useful.
a
And now, of course, if you're in an elevator anywhere in the world, you're liable to hear a Janis Joplin song. And that's exactly what's happened with Dawn's stuff. Dawn's stuff early on, especially the stuff in causal inference, but not only, the stuff in multiple imputation and other things, was spurned. And in fact, he can tell you how long it took him to get that work accepted. And now it is so mainstream that people don't even cite it. They just go ahead and use it. And so, in fact, we hear people talking about multiple imputation in the elevators all the time, Dawn. All right, so let me kill this guy and move on. So I'm going to give some introductions here of people who are going to get us started. And I'm going to start with Judy Singer. Judy, why don't you come up, and while you're coming up, I'll get you sort of queued up, although I don't think you have slides. Is that right? So Judy is Senior Vice Provost for Faculty Development and Diversity at the university. She is the James Bryant Conant Professor of Education at Harvard University. She is a graduate of the department, which is important to us, and we hope it remains important to her, and an elected fellow of the American Educational Research Foundation. Judy's been a great friend of the department, both when she was a faculty member in the department, in the School of Education, the Graduate School of Education, and when she moved on to Vice Provost. Judy.
Thanks, Dave. Super.
For now.
I'm actually very delighted to be here because, as Dave said, this opportunity combines three roles of mine that often are well disparate. So as the Senior Vice Provost for Faculty Development and Diversity, I'm in charge of faculty affairs for the university, and honoring one of our distinguished faculty members, Don Rubin, on his 70th birthday is something that I take great pleasure in. I'm also a professor of statistics at the Ed School, where I have been using and teaching Don's work for decades, and I think I speak for everybody in the room, everybody in statistics, but certainly everybody in educational statistics owes a particular debt to Don for his many contributions. But in addition to being an alum of the department, I was actually a student in Don's causal inference class in 1978. And I remember that. Is anybody else here who was actually in that class? Oh, there we go. Wow, I haven't seen you in a while. So we would gather on the 6th floor of the Science Center in a little seminar room. And Don was talking about things that, as Dave was suggesting, seemed sort of odd and sort of impossible to even think about at that time. And so, Don, I can actually say 35 years ago, I don't think either of us would think that you'd be here and I'd be here and we'd be celebrating this. I think the p-value was extraordinarily low for that. So today, you're going to hear lots about Don's accomplishments, and I think that is quite fitting. But I'd also like to take a moment to celebrate the Department of Statistics as a whole, because the department as a whole is what has allowed Don to flourish in many ways, and I think it's hard for the department to toot its own horn, and so I'd like to do a little tooting. So for those of you of a certain age, you will remember the Wayback Machine of Rocky and Bullwinkle. This was a machine that you could go into and go back to a different point in time. So I'm going to go back to the spring of 1978 when Don was a visiting lecturer in the department. And I'm going to give you a sense of what it was like, okay? Art Dempster, who also happens to be my next-door neighbor and is traveling to see his grandson right now and regrets not being here, was the only full-time senior faculty member in the department. Fred Mosteller had gone over to the School of Public Health to chair the biostatistics department. All told, there were 15 graduate students. There were 5 undergraduate concentrators. That represented a 67% increase over the year before when there were only 3. The total enrollment for the academic year is just over 300. It's actually at pretty close to an all-time low. When Fred Mosteller was teaching Statistics 100, it had been higher. The research faculty were of quality, but the department was very small, and things have changed. things have dramatically changed. I mean, certainly society has changed its attitudes towards statistics. I mean, the reactions we all get now when we say we're statisticians are quite different from what those of us who are old enough to remember what it was like 20 or 30 years ago. I took a course in that once. I hated it. What's it good for, et cetera. That's totally changed. But part of why the department has changed is the sea change in the recognition of teaching and the role of teaching in the undergraduate and graduate experience. We have dedicated faculty who are committed to pedagogy. And I should add that I talked to Jeremy Bloxham, who's the Dean of Science for the FAS, in making these remarks to ask what he would have said were he here. And he wanted to make the point that this inextricable link between pedagogy and also support for the department is what is going to continue to make the department great in the years ahead. So now I'd like to give you a more recent statistical portrait. 8 years ago, there were about 1,000 students taking courses in the stat department. 7 years ago, 1,200, but the numbers of concentrators were still in the single digits. In fact, by 2006-07, we finally went into double digits for undergraduate concentrators, 12 to be precise. And then enrollment started to grow. 1,500 4 years ago, 2,000 2 years ago, this year almost reaching 2,500 students. Concentrators are also on the rise. 4 years ago, they rose above 30, above 100 for the first time last year, above 150 this academic year. And I think the most startling statistic that, that Jeremy shared with me was when the freshman class, the incoming freshman class of Harvard College was surveyed this year. A staggering 320 of them, that's 20% of the incoming freshman class at Harvard, expressed an interest potentially in concentrating in statistics. That is a total sea change. And I would say that even Don has played a role in this. Don has supervised more Hoops Prize winners. That's the undergraduate thesis competition for the outstanding theses than anyone else in the statistics department, contributing to the excellence in pedagogy in the department and commitment to undergraduate education. I would say that somewhere my advisor, Fred Mosteller, is watching this event and smiling and thinking that this was part of what he wanted to do when he founded the department. He would be very happy to see Don here and was a great supporter of Don. And now I'm going to practice causal inference. I'm going to make a clear causal inference between all that observational data and the growth of the department, the growth of the faculty of the department, because there is this inextricable link between the pedagogy of the department and serving students and the commitment of the administration to growing the department, increasing the number of faculty, increasing the number of graduate students. So I'm going to stop here. I want to just say on behalf of President Drew Faust and Provost Alan Garber, who are with the overseers, this is the Overseers and Corporation Weekend, I want to welcome you all to this event, and I would like to celebrate Don. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy. It's not the intent to leave the picture of Janis Joplin up there for the entire afternoon. So if Professor Rosowski can come up to the front, I'll start the introductions, but let's see how we kill this here. Probably with that. Okay, great. So Professor Henry Rosowski has long ties with Don. He currently holds the Geyser University Professorship Emeritus from 1973 to 84, and then again from 1990 to 91. Professor Rosowski served as Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. He was acting president in 1984 and 1987. Later, you and I can perhaps talk about these acting jobs. I can use a little help here and there. Okay. He served as chair of the Department of Economics, and when he was appointed to the Harvard Corporation in 1997, he was the first faculty member to do so in over a century. He's received many honors, and it would really take the rest of our afternoon to list them, but the one that I noticed that was quite special is a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor in France. That's really quite interesting for an economist. Finally, when Shaoli Meng was appointed Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, I think he got at least 2 copies of a very special book called The University and Owner's Manual, which Professor Rosowski wrote which I read cover to cover when I first took on a department chair on the other side of the river, and it's quite a remarkable and very balanced account of how universities sort of lurch forward and get things done over time. Professor Osofsky.
Ladies and gentlemen, my title, or the title I've been assigned, is quite pretentious: Historical University Perspective. It reminded me of two stories. The first one has to do with a famous Harvard graduate, Robert Benchley, who graduated in 1913. There must be some who remember him. He was a great comedian and movie actor. It took him 5 years to graduate because he refused to take any course above the first floor. But in an examination, he was asked to discuss the fisheries dispute between Canada and the United States from the point of view of Canada and the United States. And he said, "I'm unable to do that. I can't discuss it from the Canadian or the American point of view. I'll discuss it from the point of view of the fish." So that is what I'm going to do today. Not so much the university perspective, but my own. The second is of course, a Jewish story. The story has to do with a man who is dying, and the rabbi comes, and the rabbi says to him, "You know that I have to eulogize you, and what do you want me to say about you?" Well, the man said, "You know, I built the biggest synagogue in town. I always fed all the poor. I represented the community in so many different ways. I was a leading citizen. But above all, don't forget to remind everybody that I was world famous for my modesty." So here are the two sort of parentheses that I wish to discuss. As Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, I had the privilege of hiring Don. He arrived in 1984. I have to tell you the truth, I don't really remember this event. I didn't realize how important it was going to be. I hired a great many people. But Don says he remembers it very well, and that there were no outstanding issues. He had no demands. There were no negotiations. It just went very easily. I have to say, I find this rather hard to believe. But I have no evidence to the contrary. Now, while I don't remember the negotiations with Don specifically, I do remember some of the things that Judy Singer already alluded to. The department has more than doubled its size. No one ever talked about closing the department anymore. You didn't mention that, but in fact, that was mentioned at that time. Statistics in arts and sciences was never again viewed as a simple service discipline. And I think that was an enormous step forward. Teaching at all levels, university-wide, really made a major impact, but of course also a great research impact that spread throughout the country and internationally. Now, no one does this alone, and I hope Don's modesty won't be offended if I say that he didn't do it alone. But I do know this, it wouldn't have happened without Don. And that is a very important thing. I want to conclude with another a very brief story. Don and I both love Scotch. And I had a discussion with him a few weeks ago when he sort of told me what I should say. And I said to him, you know, I really like Macallan. Don looked at me, and he said that he drinks Lagavulin. I looked up the pronunciation, and I think I did all right. And then Don turned to me and said, Macallan is much too smooth for me. And I think that is something of deep significance. Now, you just ponder it, and maybe by the end of this celebration, you will see why that's a very important remark. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So next up is someone who literally needs no introduction, but I will give one in a second. We have to load. You have slides on here, right, Charlie? All right, so let's kill this one and find your slides, and then I'll actually let you find your slides, and I'll introduce you. It's on the desktop. Charlie does need no introduction here. He has been a remarkable stalwart of the department since he came here from Chicago some time ago. When did you arrive from Chicago?
2001.
2001. He's the Whipple V. N. Jones Professor and former Chair of Statistics. This former part we have to talk about here because Honorary Professor at the University of Hong Kong, Faculty Affiliate at the Center of Health Statistics and the University of Chicago, and many awards, including the COPS Award, when he was younger and had more hair, for the the award for a statistician under 40. Okay, and you were a student of Don's, if I have that right. Yes, you and Andy Gilman. Yes. So I think that, as Judy was saying earlier, of course, one of the things that we know about Charlie is that the department has flourished under Don's leadership, under Carl's leadership, certainly in recent years under Charlie's leadership, because Charlie embraces the entire aspect of an academic department from research to teaching. And I've watched him teach, and I've seen very few people who are more excited at being in the classroom than Charlie. Charlie.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, for those of you who know me reasonably well, you probably can guess that this is not a title that I have written. This was given to me, and because this title has no food involved and no drinks either, at least when you're sober. But if you drink enough, you may see the connection there. But I wanted to start by telling you actually a couple of titles that is actually turned out to be, I think will give me a good metaphor to summarize Don's contribution across the board. 10 years ago, actually precisely 11 years ago, that Andy Gelman and I, we edited a book in honor of Don Rubin's 60th birthday. And we both want to have a fun title for the book. So you probably can guess what my title would be, because obviously, as you know, Professor Harris actually just mentioned that Don is fond of whiskey, so I was able to manage to put the whiskey in the title. And so I'm going to show you this title. Blue Label Statistics, 60 Years Sipping with Don Rubin. Now, unfortunately, did not make into this the title of this book because Andrew Gelman disagreed with me. He preferred a different aspect of the Don he wanted to feature. And Don, you won't be offended because it's from Andy. Defendants of a Tobacco Company, from I. Fisher to D.B. Rubin. Now, I'm not joking. These are all recorded here. If you read the book, it's all there. So we end up, we settle with applied Bayesian modeling and the causal inference from incomplete data perspectives. That's actually a very accurate title because there's three major areas Don has worked on, which we could talk a little bit about, is Bayesian modeling, causal inference, and incomplete data. So we were pretty happy with this accurate title, although I obviously would love to have one of these two. What's really very interesting that when I was giving this task that from Dave to really summarize Don's work, this cross-broad inference, in 15 minutes, I say, that's an impossible task. That's absolutely impossible task. Even Don himself cannot do it. With his modesty, he still cannot do it. But these two titles actually do give me a very good metaphor to summarize what Don's contribution. So I'm going to tell Don that your work really has intoxicated generations of statisticians, because almost everything you do turned out to be smoking hot. Now, I'm going to tell you why I say almost in the end. Now, I won't, as a statistician, I won't make these big statements without data. I actually have data. So this data was collected not by me, by my collaborator on this project, who asked me to not reveal his name until the end. Unfortunately, he won't be able to come here today because of family situation as well. So I will tell you who this person is. And so he looked at the Google citations. Now, we all understand the citation numbers, you shouldn't trust them on the face value, okay? But they do give the relative order pretty nicely, okay? Now, it's astonishing to see someone has H index is 107. You know what that means? There's 107 papers. Each of them has more than 107 citations. That's a lot. Most of in this room, probably your H index does not exceed 100. That's my guess. Okay. So now you probably also see that the citation goes very nicely, but somehow when Don hits 70, he stopped working. You see, the thing just drops down. That as Don, of course, will tell you how to impute that, all the Kaplan-Meier estimator, all the stuff, which that's why Don work on those things. And but let's look at more detail. I'm quite sure they're missing data here. I'm quite sure these citations are missed a lot. As Dave mentioned, that people start citing EM like citing Taylor expansion. Nobody ever write down reference for Taylor expansion, right? Because you just cite it. So I'm sure there are tons of things. So we also collected data. What are the top 20 papers? I think that would be quite interesting to see. The top 20 papers in terms of citation as given by the Google Scholar. So I'm going to go from the back, from the 16, this is 20 to 16, and you may see that there's over the years, but most importantly, the principal stratification, which is really a recent paper, but it's already very high, make that top 20. Now you can imagine this paper's impact as we move forward. I mean, this is going to be enormous paper. Okay, now as you read through them, I want you to start thinking about what are the top 5. I'm going to play a little bit game, let you to guess what are the top 5, but let's read through those. You will see lots of causal inference, other stuff. Top 11 to 15, this is, again, you see more causal inference, and I had the great fortune that the 2 papers was actually with Don, although one of them, Don would agree with me, that probably is the most simple paper that we have done together, which turned out to be my most highly cited paper on this because somebody put it in the software in psychology. You know what happens when that happens. So that's the top 11 to 15, and the top 6 to 10. Then you start seeing multiple imputation, the causal inference, obviously, and the observation study. So now let's have a little bit fun, okay? What is the number 5 paper? Right? Anybody want to guess what's the number 5? All right. Now, I'm going to actually give the audience a little bit of incentive. For those who answer correctly, you're going to actually get a ping from the graduate school. Okay? And I'm going to tell you a little bit of story why I created this ping, and has a significance for Don as well, and I have quite a few of them here. Okay, so what's the number 5? Bayesian bootstrap. 76 biometrics. Anyone else? EM algorithm, okay. Really? I don't think anybody gets correctly, so. It's a very good one, but it shows Don's impact outside of statistics. These are the papers really have tremendous impact outside of statistics. All right, nobody got that right. What's number 4? 76 biometric. Somebody's going to keep asking, I don't know to get it. You only get 1, okay? You're not going to get 2. But the upwards every time, you're right. Okay, so 76 will be The 76, it's the paper down to find the missing data mechanism. Is this number 4 or number? The Bayesian bootstrap, you're saying, okay. This is papers, no books. Books comes later. This is only papers. Gelman Rubin, okay. I'm disappointed by this crowd now. But, Don, do you have a guess? No. See, there's someone is honest here, okay? Modest. You're right. All right, so. What's number 3? I'm sorry? Propensity score paper. It's a very good guess. Which one? That's right. There's a. You mentioned what? Gelman Rubin. Now you have to compete now. These are all very likely paper. Bayesian bootstrap. Someone just loves Bayesian bootstrap. Multiple imputation. All right. I guess I could have just go on and, Dave will kick me out, so let me just show it. That's so you get one there. You get one later, okay? What's number 2? It's getting easier. Number 2 is getting easier now. The question is, there's a propensity score, there's obviously EM algorithm. Which one comes first? How many think the propensity score is next? How many think EM? Okay, these are propensity score. How many think the EM? Well, it's the complement. Okay. Propensity scores. All right, don't worry. You all will get. In fact, I lied. Everyone's going to get the pin, okay? I brought plenty of them, okay? So, now, you probably all think it's easy. Next one is the EM algorithm, which is. But I'm going to make it a little bit harder. How many citations?
17,000. No, 32,000. 36,000. Bayesian bootstrap.
Who said 32 so? Don't look at the Google, okay? What? 40,000? What? 52? Okay, now I'm like an auction, like 1, 52. Do you have a 56? 30. Now, but that's was from last week. I'm sure it goes up this week.
Is 4 out of 5 my data? 77, 83, 76, and 74. Are those all from my data? 77.
Inspired by it?
83,
No,
76,
77
and
now.
74.
No, that doesn't, yeah, that one doesn't.
Propensity matching is mine. Statistic data is mine.
No,
And
missing data is
estimated
not.
causal effects is mine.
That, number 2, inspired.
All right.
I didn't do the statistics, but he did the statistics for my work.
Top 5 books.
No, I'm very proud that I.
The book with Ra obviously has been, absolutely popular. The Bayesian data analysis book with all these additions, and the multiple imputation paper is actually, if you think about it, it's a very special topic book. It's actually very impressive. And we also put down this one, which the book hasn't really appeared yet, but we're quite sure it's going to be a very popular book. That's the one with Guido is here, right? So that. What are the major areas Don has worked on many things. As I mentioned, that we're going to actually classify, we means my collaborator and I, in terms of the causal inference, the missing data, and the Bayesian data analysis, and we do by the area. This is among the top 20 papers. There are 7 of them are directly on causal inference, and there are 4 of them missing data, although everything's related. Causal inference is also potential outcome is obviously the missing data as well, but we have to find some ways to sort of classify it, and the Bayesian analysis, and there are 3 of them. And we also saw just to do things by see how Don grow as a researcher that by the years. So this is the 70s. What are the greatest hits from down in 70s? Now, we want to have a picture for each decade. And it turned out we do not have a picture from the decade of 70s, and I thought that was entirely okay because that was the decade that he invented multiple imputation, so I'm going to have a little bit of fun later to impute that picture multiply, all right? So you just have to be aware bear with me. So that is a decade you have the EM algorithm, the missing data mechanism, multiple imputation, Rubin causal model, so that was really absolutely a great decade, that term. The next decade is not bad. Propensity score, positive predictive check, 1984, Bayesian bootstrap. Now, see, I put a Bayesian bootstrap there. So you would say, why did I put the Bayesian bootstrap there? Many would say, well, who cares about Bayesian bootstrap? But Don cares. Well, seriously, the reason I put there is that in some part of the world's statistics, actually Don is only known for his Bayesian bootstrap. You might be surprised, but I just want to show this sort of, actually, there are a lot of people follow up on work on Bayesian bootstrap, which probably is not in this crowd. I just want to show down this very broad inference, even something he was doing it basically to tell people why that was wrong, and people still follow up. But the next decade, the R-head statistics, the one being the instrument variable, the air paper, and there are lots of EM extensions, including the one that I had a pleasure to work with down. 2000s, the principal stratification is this decade. The whole confidentiality, now this is the one that you may or may not realize. Don wrote a paper about you can use multiple imputation for confidentiality in somewhere, and that actually has been really getting picked up, and as time goes on, there will be more and more work. And the whole notion of designing of cause effects, and Don has been working quite hard. And again, those things, you will see that the citation obviously is a little bit low at this moment because these things are moving forward. Then 2010, this is getting just now, and the re-randomization, the worker with Kerry, where's Kerry? That I'm quite sure is going to pick up, because this is something people always worry about. It's a lot of question mark. It's not like I don't know what Don is working on, but I want to keep him modest. So so I'm just going to let him to not predict too hard what those things are, but there will be. There are also a few hits for the future generation. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, this is what I said, almost everything he has done turned out to be smoking hot. The reason I said almost is there are a few works, at least I know one of them, and for me personally, I think it's absolutely a great hit. But it's still going to take time for people to pick up. And Don probably can guess which one I'm going to talk about. It's the meta-analysis one. Don, you may remember the paper you wrote about thinking about meta-analysis, not about summarizing the average effect. That's actually not relevant. It's really building responsive risk to predict what is the best outcome and the best design. So I think that's a really breakthrough paper. It's in a volume, right? And not too many people have really picked up on that one yet, but I'm quite sure this one is going to, as we have more and more these studies that we need to study that particular methods. This one is coming, and I know Don, for whatever the reason, really hates DAG. Is that? Dagger, whatever it is.
Oh, DAGs. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I don't even know what this means, but this was from my collaborator that I guess meant to be something. Huh? Yeah, I know what DAG is. I don't know what this title means, but actually was as I was thinking about doing these things, I solicited this collaborative of mine. We were actually going to present everything in a DAG format, just for the fun. But eventually we decided not to do it, but now I'm going to review who my partner was, the partner of crime. So we actually draw a DAG, RV, your student. We actually had the whole DAG there about how the things influence each other, but just for the fun. Okay, so let me conclude by telling you that the one thing that I said I'm going to do, I'm going to impute Don Rubin what he looks like when he was during the 1970s. Don, you can close your eye. Now, first I would say I'm going to do multiple imputation, and all imputations has errors. Imputations are not accurate. They may not look like Don Rubin, but use your imagination. All right? These are all real pictures and real people. So first is, do you think this was Don Rubin? No. Who was he? Don, do you recognize? Paul Holland. Was in the department. It's a similar time as you were. See, we find, the nearest neighbor imputation, someone was time. What about this one? Don, is that you?
Close, but no.
No. Okay. Steve Feinberg, another alum of the department. By the way, these are all pictures taken in the stat department. And I probably, for most of you, you have only seen this first time. I got these pictures all from Jay Goodman during the 50th anniversary celebrations. What about this one? Start looking similar to Don. All right. So for years, Don was saying m equal to 3 is enough. This shows m equal to 3 is not enough. We need m equal to 5. We're going to do more imputations, okay? What about this one? Was this Don Rubin? Show you one more picture. Look very carefully. When you do imputation, you need to put in all the covariates, all the possible predictors. Look carefully. Look at the writings. Look at the handwriting. Look at what he was doing. He was doing LP space. He's doing delta epsilon language. He's proving convergence. And that was Don Rubin. Yes. That was you.
I was confused back then, wasn't I?
That was confused. Look at the writings. Okay. Don, you don't recognize yourself?
Nope.
He's just trying to deny, because. But that was Don Rubin. And that was, I think, probably 1960-ish, right? Because you're in the graduate school here. Yeah. And so you know how Don always said, well, most times said, those mathematics are not really that useful. That's because he has already done it. Look at he was doing if and only if, the sum, the LP space, all the stuff. So he could do it. He just did not want to do it. So let me conclude by, I think that's the last slide. Let me conclude by congratulating Don for really the tremendous contribution to our field and for this, not only just statistics, but really across the board. And I want to mention that, as I said at the very beginning, that I bring this a ping from the graduate school. I want to make a connection to Don here, that I think I have enough to give everyone a ping. The graduate students, we're all graduate students, alumni of the department. Graduate school does not have a cohort because, not like an undergraduate, it's a year of graduation. So when I become dean, I decided to create a cohort using the year of entering. And this was last year, was 2013, but 2013 is also Don's 70th birthday. So I thought it would be appropriate that for whoever wants to be a part of the Don Rubin cohort, that we all get this ping to congratulate Don for his 70th birthday. Congratulations, Don. I will distribute it later, okay? I will hold back.
I'm expecting to see a lot of these pins on eBay in the next 10 hours. So let's find Liz's presentation, and I will introduce Liz. It's on the desktop. Here, do you know how to use a PC? Okay, good. So Elizabeth Stewart, it's just terrific that she could come up from Johns Hopkins. She is currently associate professor at Johns Hopkins. She has a master's and a PhD from the department, the PhD in 2004, and worked with Don. Liz has received many, many teaching awards at Hopkins. I like to think that she was inspired for that by part of the time, at least, that she was in the department. She was recently appointed to as one of 10 members for the Clinical Trials Advisory Panel for the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, which is PCORI, which is one of the big initiatives of the government to try to start understanding how things behave outside the context of the controlled randomized trials, which can often be clean but not generalizable. So the one special thing about Liz, I think of Liz as one of Don's warriors. Because, in fact, when you make a breakthrough in an area of statistics and it gets published in important places like the Annals or Biometrica, et cetera, you really, in order for it to really succeed, you need people in the trenches who are using it on problems that matter desperately to people. And that's what Liz has been doing. She's been working, sort of toiling away, making sure that the stuff that she first learned from Don and then extended in her work has a home in the very best application. So, Liz, Don Rubin is a teacher and mentor.
Great. Thank you so much. It's really such an honor to be asked to do this and to reflect on Don's influence both on me and then also sort of on the fields as a whole, and in particular his teaching and mentoring. I'm glad to hear that someone with a small stature like mine can be a warrior in the trenches. So I think I like that analogy. So my remarks are going to be maybe of a slightly more personal nature than the previous speakers, and it really is such an illustrious group. It's a little intimidating to be up here. But I'm going to, there's a lot of things, of course, that I could focus on. There's sort of 4 areas that I'm going to talk about. The first is just sort of the general idea of mentoring and building community. And what I want you to do is just look around the room and sort of think about all the people you already knew before you came here today. You know, I think that there's really, it's sort of a testament to Don's sort of bringing people together and building community that we all come for this, and that many of us know each other already, even those of us who didn't overlap during our actual time, perhaps here at Harvard. In preparing for this talk, I emailed a bunch of sort of former students and colleagues of Don's and asked for what their comments were, and I'll bring some of those in throughout. One of Don's recent students mentioned to me that at her first JSM, he showed her around and introduced her to people, and she had a clear sense of sort of his pride, both in his sort of former students and then also in sort of bringing her into the fold. And I definitely felt that myself as well. And again, I think it's one of these not sort of super tangible aspects, but a real mentoring sort of role that we've all felt. People talk about academic families, and I think that the sort of Don Rubin students and the Harvard Statistics Department in general embodies that idea of an academic family perhaps better than most, where it actually feels like you are entering sort of a family. And again, I know myself, I feel connections with the people who were ahead of me in graduate school, even if we weren't actually physically there at the same time. The other clear testimony to Don's, efforts and incredible success in teaching and mentoring is looking around the room and seeing the caliber and success of the people here. I'm not going to go into the details of that because that could take all afternoon, but just seeing the breadth of successful places, whether it's government or academia or industry, Don's really sort of has had an influence by these very successful mentees that he's had. So, of course, as a student of Don's, and we will hear much more about sort of statistical aspects, and Zhao Li gave a really nice summary of that. Of course, as a student of Don's, you got a breadth of statistical knowledge. One thing that has always struck me is that, my main field is causal inference and propensity scores, but leaving graduate school, I picked up missing data and surveys and multiple imputation and all sorts of things. You sort of left not with just your own narrow research area, but with a really broad understanding of a broad range of topics. So, his breadth of knowledge of a variety of topics very much trickled down to his students. The other thing that I think Don was very effective at is matching students with topics. And this relates a little bit to some of what Zhao Li was saying. I still remember sitting in Don's office, maybe in my second or third year of graduate school, and he knew I was interested in sort of social science and public policy and causal inference, and he sort of said something like, there's this whole field of matching methods, and no one's really doing work in that area. And that has really been such fantastic advice and really has set me off to really do research. The fact that he was able to identify this area that sort of felt like it had work to be done, but that was also sort of neglected at that time. This was, 2000 or so. And sort of being able to recognize that and recognize what I might be interested in, I think is just a great skill. And that was one thing I heard from other alums and students as well, was just this appreciation for his ability to sort of pair students with projects. So this part is not going to surprise anyone. One thing that really cracked me up, so I emailed maybe 20 people, and I asked, like, what has Don taught you, and every single person who wrote back to me mentioned at least one grammatical rule that they had learned from Don. And I find myself still, when I edit students' papers, I switch that from that and which, and I'm an incredible stickler for that now, and it's because of him doing it to me, however, 15 years ago. So these were that versus which and while versus although. So it's very funny to me how many of us learned like very good grammar in our statistics PhD programs. I'm not sure there's any other statistics PhD program that would teach grammar so well. But more broadly, and sort of a little bit more on a more serious note, I think that this precision of language is indicative of Don's sort of general ideas about the value in clear communication and precision of teaching and writing. And these grammar rules are one example of that. But he really places an emphasis on clear communication and clear writing. So one of Don's other students in his email back said, "I have found over and over that the attempt to explain an idea in clear English prose is as important a step in the research as any other." And I think we would all agree with that. I find myself, often my first role as a statistician is helping the researchers identify what their actual question is. And I think that's again, it's a sort of type of statistical thinking that's really emphasized by Don. I'm sure also many of you know about Don's sort of teaching in general. I was the TA for what was called QR33 at the time. Does it still exist? So it doesn't still exist, but QR33 was a causal inference class for undergrads at Harvard College. And undergrads who were not statistics majors, in fact, it was for undergrads who really didn't want to be taking a math or statistics class. And we started this class, and sort of people I'd talked to were like, wow, you're going to teach causal inference to these undergrads who don't want to be taking math or statistics. But it worked amazingly well. And again, it's because of these ideas of just being very transparent. And often the sort of phrase, how would you explain it to your mother? That kind of, if you don't have an intuitive understanding of how a method is working and the ability to explain that, is it really worth sort of, it's not going to have nearly as much impact if you can't explain it in a way that people can understand. One of the homeworks we had in QR33 was we had students watch It's a Wonderful Life as a way to look at different potential outcomes and sort of think about, oh, well, the world could have been different if something different had happened. So just this ability to kind of connect deep statistical concepts to sort of very things that students were going to relate to. It's another example of that, actually, with Guido in the room. I think the Angrist-Imbens and Rubin instrumental variables paper is a tremendous example of that, which talks about instrumental variables and the assumptions underlying instrumental variables, but in a way that is just much more intuitive and easy for sort of people to think about and get their heads around. And these are just a few examples of, again, this importance. And I think because of this importance that Don has placed on communication, this has really helped the methods get a broad dissemination. So I just have a couple more notes. So I think as I was sort of thinking about this talk, I was thinking that I think one sign of a good mentor is someone who influences your life outside of work. And this, to me, when thinking about this, was evidenced in this first quote, which my husband and I still use. And Don probably doesn't even remember this, but in grad school, my close friend Sam Cook missed a flight because she slept in and then she tried to take the metro to the airport, and she missed her flight by like 5 minutes. And Don sort of was like, well, why didn't you just pay for a cab? And this phrase, we make money to make our lives easier. And that sort of, in cases like that, you just spend the money, and that's one of the reasons why we try to make money, is to then facilitate other aspects of our life. And again, it's just one of these little Donisms that I've found has sort of permeated my life even outside of statistics. There's other things like that. As I've been mentoring my own students, more and more I find myself sort of repeating things that Don told me. One that I really like is this idea, don't turn down a job before you know what it is. And this idea that, don't not apply for something because you don't think you're gonna like it or you're not sure. Go ahead, apply, interview, talk to them, learn about it before you decide whether or not to take it, and it's actually, now that I'm thinking about this, it's like Don was the original lean in, sort of a lean in, like don't not apply, go ahead and take a step and then make the decision for yourself. And then, of course, finally, I do now always have a bottle of Lagavulin on my kitchen counter. And, sort of in a more tangible way, I can sort of see Don's influence when at the end of a long day or something, it brings back many memories of sitting and drinking Lagavulin. So I want to just end with one quick story from actually the first time I met Don, and kind of like Henry Rozovsky's story. He may not remember this, but I remember when I was applying to graduate schools and I was deciding between a few different programs, some of which are represented in this room and shall remain nameless. And I came to Harvard to visit and sat down in Don's office, and I was like 22 years old. And Don sort of looked at me and was like, well, why would you pick anywhere else? What are you thinking? Of course you're gonna come here, and what's the big decision? And I just, that was the first piece of advice Don gave me, and it was just such wonderful advice. And I think, that has continued for the next however many, 15 or so years. So looking back, I'm just so thankful for this opportunity to sort of join the academic family of Don Rubin, and again, have this chance to talk about it today. So thank you.
Nat Schenker, would you come up, Nat, and we'll get you queued up, and while Nat is on his way up. So Nat is currently Associate Director for Research and Methodology at the National Center for Health Statistics at the CDC. So there's an important job, if there was one. There are many important jobs in statistics, but there are enormous problems at the National Center for Health Statistics. You're on the desktop here. I'll let you, oops. See it?
I'll find it with my glasses.
Okay, good. Nat has a Founders Award from the American Statistical Association, which are really special and very hard to get for extraordinary service to the discipline. He also has the Elijah White Outstanding Scientist Award at the National Center for Health Statistics and has a PhD in statistics from Chicago in 1985. Now, what I've left out, of course, is something that's keeping him very busy this year. He is current president of the American Statistical Association, which is a wonderful way for you to spend your time for all of us, but must be an enormous time sink for you. But it's terrific that you're doing it. All right. So, Nat.
Thank you. Well, like everybody else, I didn't choose my topic, but it's a pleasure for me to talk about this one. And I appreciate David's introduction. One thing that he didn't mention is that I'm Don Rubin's third PhD student. I think that's the thing that I'm the most proud of. I don't know if the first and second are here. Oh, Paul. Okay, so I'm the second most senior student of Don's here. I was hoping that I could say first, but it's nice to see you. So I'm also required as a federal employee to say that the findings and conclusions in this presentation are my own and do not necessarily represent the opinions of the National Center for Health Statistics, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the government. And I'm not sure what that means in this context, but I think it means that the government doesn't necessarily think of you as a leader in the statistics profession, or maybe it's that the government doesn't want to wish you a happy birthday. But I certainly do, so. So as I think one of just a couple of representatives of Don's University of Chicago cohort, even though I'm supposed to talk about Don as a leader in the profession, I felt obliged to say a little bit about the Chicago days. And like Liz, I'm going to give a few important lessons that I've learned from Don. And then I'm going to try to be sort of like Jay Leno, or maybe like Xiaoli Meng, and do a countdown of, it was very hard for me to figure out Don's done so much for the profession, so I tried to pick a top 4 and order them, and I don't have any pins to give out, so I won't make you all guess, but I'll just go through them. Okay. So a couple of reminiscences from the Chicago days. It was a wonderful time to be at the University of Chicago when Don was there. I actually came back from a summer and fall stint at Rand and arrived back at Chicago in January of 1983, and that's right when Don started, and it was a terrific time. Don was working on his book on multiple imputation, and we all got to contribute to that. He had a student, Kim Hung Lee, who basically invented Gibbs sampling, I think. He did something called Markov chain imputation. And Tanner and Wong, Martin Tanner and Wing Wong were there at the time, and I remember Wing coming into Don's office and saying, well, I was thinking about EM and I was thinking about multiple imputation, sort of tried to put them together, and we came up with this data augmentation. So it's really amazing. Professor Rosovsky said that Don came to Harvard in 1984. Well, he came to Chicago in 1983, so he was just there for about a year and a half, and he had an enormous footprint there, and it was really thrilling. He had 4 PhD students, and he influenced a score of others, so it was really impressive. Now, I want to tell you a couple of things on the lighter side. I don't think Don believed in using traditional writing paper, because the first assignment I got from him, I looked in my mailbox and found this paper towel from the men's room with Nat Shanker, check out this paper and think about that, So, that was kind of a surprise. So I've tried to emulate that, and I usually write my government memos on paper towel. No. So, another thing that I think his students at Chicago experienced, and probably the ones at Harvard too, was the thing, we talked about Don's great lessons. Well, I think the one sentence that I heard the most from Don was, just give me 5 minutes. And I say, yeah, right. My second home at the University of Chicago was on the floor outside of Don's office. I used to sit there a lot and wait for Don to be done with what he was doing. But what I have to say is, once you got time with Don, he was really with you. I mean, he took care of his stuff, and then when you talked to him, he concentrated on you. He wasn't going and answering the phone and thinking about whatever had just happened. He was really with you, and that was terrific. I met Don as a wee lad. He was just a wee lad in his 30s, and we celebrated his 40th anniversary at Chicago, his 40th birthday at Chicago. And remember, I was invited back here for the 55th and now the 70th, so I guess it's an arithmetic progression, or whatever you call it, a series with adding 15 each time. So please invite me back to speak at the 85th, okay? I'll appreciate that. And the final thing I wanted to mention was Don proved his athletic prowess at the University of Chicago. We had our spring picnic, and Don was the quarterback, and I was a pretty decent athlete, so Don just aired it out and threw this really long pass, and I caught it with one hand in the end zone, and we were all worried. Don just lost it. We thought he was going to have a heart attack or something. He was so excited about that. But the other thing, I was playing baseball with him in the backyard of his house once, and he beamed me right in the forehead. He was pitching to me, and luckily it was just a wiffle ball, but I still got a nice welt from that. Okay. So, yeah, you were impressive. I think it's because I hadn't done my homework that day or whatever. Okay, so what are a few important lessons? I sort of have some life lessons the way Liz did. Besides, we all had a lot of great statistical lessons from Don. What are a few of life's lessons? One of my favorites is, one of my best papers was rejected several times. This is, what was it, number 2 or 3, right? The one that Rod got his pin for, the Biometrica paper. Don writes about this in the recent COPS volume. It's a hilarious story. You all should look at that sometime if you get a chance. But it was rejected like 6 times. It was recommended for the Yiddish Weekly, I guess. And this is one of his most influential papers, obviously. So I'm glad you've published it now, because I've always felt as if I was doing plagiarism, because I kept using that story when I was a professor at UCLA. I just find it so inspiring. I always told my students one of Don Rubin's best papers was rejected from 4 different journals multiple times or whatever. The second lesson that I learned from Don is that you can always find somebody who's better than you. And that's not a put-down thing. What it's saying is, don't try to compete with everybody else. Be happy with yourself and play to your strengths. And that's a really important lesson, I think. Yeah. Now, this third one's of a more personal nature, but I was dating a woman, an LA girl, back when I was working at UCLA, and Don came out to visit, and I guess we had dinner together. It's kind of like, you know, bringing your girlfriend to meet your dad or whatever. And she was, at the time, working in AIDS research at UCLA. And Don just started grilling her and beating up on her relentlessly, just asking tough questions. And, you know, I was terrified. I knew I had just lost my girlfriend. You know. But she hung in there, and she didn't back down from Don at all. And I realized, you know, Don likes to test people, and he was having a good time. And I think she had a good time with that, too. So the next morning, Don gave me a call from his hotel, and he said, her name's Eve, and he said, Eve's great, make it work. So that was very important advice. We've been married for 22 years now, so thank you, Don. Now, the final one is when I got tenure at UCLA, and you know, it's very hard to leave a tenured position. So I wanted to go to the government, and Don said, now that you've made your mother proud, you can do what you want to do. I see this mother thing recurring, right? What would Freud say about this? No, I'm just kidding. But actually, that's very important. It's kind of like playing to your strengths and being happy with yourself and not just trying to go for prestige. But I actually, as president, David mentioned that I was the ASA president. Just last month, I gave the keynote address at the Conference on Statistical Practice of the American Statistical Association. And I tweaked this a little bit and said, it's fine to make your mother proud, but that's not all there is to your career. And then I gave them your quote, too. And Don has made me famous because people started tweeting that. So I had never been tweeted before, so I was very excited. Thank you. Okay, top 4 countdown. Don Rubin is a leader in the statistics profession. Well, at first I thought, this is tough, because a lot of times when people think about a leader in the statistics profession, they think about people who've done all this service, you know, and that's not Don's bag. Don you know, writes articles and is a great teacher and all. Then I looked at his record, and look at this. Dave mentioned that I got a Founders Award for service to the profession. Don's done about 3 times as much as I have. 6 positions as an officer or board member, 13 as an editorial board member or editor, 10 advisory or visiting committees, 14 scientific panels and work groups, 12 committees for professional societies, and yeah, he was department chair at some university in Massachusetts, not Chicago, for 13 years. That's pretty impressive. And like Xiaoli, I'll say that these estimates might be inaccurate due to missing data. I think they're probably undercounts. And a few prominent examples, you know, he was the coordinating and applications editor of JASA. And I listed some articles here that a lot of articles were published during his time, and I sort of stuck with 82 and 83. He was actually from 80 to 82, and there's always a lag, so I was trying to get ones that you were responsible for, and I think these 4 were, and they were all important to me. Rod's paper on models for non-response and sample surveys, Greenleaf, Rees, and Zishang had a non-ignorable model for imputation. Wachter and Trussell on estimating historical heights. That's a great example if you're teaching missing data, because they had truncated age distributions. And of course, Carl Morris's paper on parametric empirical bays. And Don was on the ASA board and the IMS council, and he was, I guess, the theory chair for a panel on incomplete data of the National Academy of Sciences that came out with the famous 3 volumes. So Don's service has been incredible, but I only listed that as number 4. So what's number 3? Well, Don is a role model. One of the things that I think is cool about Don is he's listed as one of the most highly cited mathematicians, but as Xiaoli mentioned, well, he can do math, but he doesn't like to do it for its own sake. In fact, I think Don's written more annals papers that don't have equations than anyone else I know. I've tried to emulate that. I got a JASA paper in 2006, and one of the referees said, there are no equations here. So I stuck in the equation for logistic regression or something, and then I got it accepted, so that was good. So he made a name of himself outside of academia before settling in as a professor. Several people have done that, but I think it's rarer than being right. Carl's one example. But I've tried to emulate that too, and I did all right in government, but I didn't settle into academia. I got tenure and then decided I had made my mother proud, so I left again. Scientific importance and validity come first. I think this isn't Don's quote, but maybe he got it from Cochrane, I'm not sure. But he'd rather devise a good solution to an important problem than a perfect solution to an unimportant problem. And I think multiple imputation is actually an example of that. Don will admit that it's not perfect, but it's very good. And I work in government and with public use data, and I just haven't found anything else, I think, that has the same generality. So people can come up with some counterexamples to show certain instances in which it doesn't do as well, but for a general purpose treatment of missing data, I really haven't been able to find anything else with its characteristics, so we tend to use that where I am. He's a defender of good science and statistics. Was it Shelley brought up the tobacco litigation? Don wasn't defending the tobacco companies. I am defending the importance of honest and competent statistics, that is all. He wrote this in a 2002 paper, and I think he showed a lot of courage to go out and do that. I kind of think of it as analogous to making sure that people have the right to a fair trial. He wants statistics to be good out there. And if I have time to do one other story, I worked at RAND at one point, and I was having dinner with my friends from RAND a couple of months ago, and one of them, I'll mention her name to Don later, but she said, "I love Don Rubin." And apparently, this was a long time ago, they had done some study on Champus, the military health insurance and all, and I guess they came up with some conclusion that it cost more than people had hoped, and some of the industry and the government didn't like that, I think, and since I mentioned government, I want you to know these are my opinions. No, anyway. So I guess some people hired a few professors to review the work and sort of be hatchet men, and Don was one of the ones that was hired, and there was a Senate investigation and everything. It turns out Don didn't do what they wanted. He said, "I like this study. They did an honest job and did a good job on it." And apparently the Senate investigation went away because Don went for good science and told the truth, not what he was putatively paid for to be a hatchet man, but instead kept his scientific integrity. And that's a real role model. So I'm not going to say much about this because a lot of other people have covered this already. Xiaoli, and I think Rod will, and Alan will. But obviously, he's made path-breaking contributions to important areas of statistics and applications. This list has already been gone through. I'll just put it up there for you to look at it for a minute. But the final thing, the applications, is very important. He doesn't just believe in deriving statistical things, but he gets involved in real applications. So what's number one, Liz? I'd say being a teacher, advisor, and mentor. And I wanted to mention his educating the profession in general versus via his short courses, his publications, etc. Now, I wanted to think about his more senior students, so I made an arbitrary cutoff and looked at his 22 PhD students who were in the 20th century. He's had a lot more in the 21st, but 13 of them are full professors at major research universities. 3 of them have named professorships. 1 of them is a dean, at least. And there's probably undercount here, too. There are 12 on editorial boards of journals, 2 COPS Awards winners, and 2 have been presidents of major statistical societies, including Dan Heichen, who's the past president of ENAR. But all of his students have contributed substantially to the profession and to applications. And one of the things I found about Don is that once you're his student, you're always his student. In fact, at JSM last summer, here I am thinking about retirement, and Don sat down at the Sunday night beer party with me and discussed my career plans with me. He's always been in touch, and he's been a tremendous help throughout my career, not just when I was in grad school. So I wrote down here, best ever. I've never seen somebody who's as good a PhD advisor and mentor and teacher as Don. I strived to be close, but couldn't even get close at all. He's just amazing. So I want to thank you for everything, Don. Thank you for everything you've done for the profession. And thank you, I'm sure I represent all of your students when I say that my career and my life wouldn't be nearly as rich without having known you and without your guidance. And happy birthday. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat. That was wonderful. Alan Zaslavsky. It's my pleasure to introduce Alan. Alan and I have been associated for quite a while. In fact, Alan, Raghu is in the same slot that he doesn't know about. He and Alan make me feel very old because the first course I taught at Harvard was a course that was cross-listed at the School of Public Health and the department here, and I taught it in the department here in survival analysis when I was working on a book, and Alan was in that class, as was Raghu. And so that was my first association with Alan, but we've worked together on many other things since. So Alan has a PhD from MIT. Not really, right? Did you work with?
Some guy at Harvard.
Some guy at Harvard, that's right. So Alan worked with Herman, I think. Is that right? And finished it off? Really, it has the MIT label,
That's the MIT label.
but the Harvard
The chair of
field.
the committee was sitting right here.
Yes, all right, so Don is the chair, okay. And I think that's actually quite something that the department has always been very good at, is sort of reaching out to people who were headed towards a career in statistics, but kind of stumbling about in an institution that wasn't really supporting them. So Alan was associate professor in this department and remains an affiliate, but he is now full professor in the Department of Healthcare Policy in the medical school. He's a fellow of the American Statistical Association, and he's a National Associate of the National Academy of Sciences, appointed in 2004. Now, I think that one of the remarkable things about Alan is his extraordinary service to the profession. If you look at the time that he has given to panels on study of poverty, the study of education, working with the National Committee on Statistics, various things, it's quite astonishing that Alan has made the impact. And knowing Alan as well as I do, it's a sort of quiet impact. He doesn't really tell many people about it. So Alan is going to talk about Don's impact on science, which is an incredibly difficult topic to do in just a few minutes, but I think Alan will make a great start at it.
Thanks, David. Well, there's going to be a little multiple imputation here as well, as you'll see in a minute. So this was the title that I came up with for this as a guiding theme. And I'm going to start out with multiply imputing, something that Shelley put up very quickly. Shelley and I have collaborated, but we're sort of afraid to because it takes us 12 years to write a paper, 4 of which are spent naming it. So this is actually showing the development of Don's work as planned when he was 4 years old before he got diverted into psychology and computer science. So it's starting with missing data, and that leading naturally to working on the EM algorithm and multiple imputation. This Bayes frequency synthesis, which he helped to develop, he developed together with the work on MCMC methods, led to posterior predictive checks. And then we have this whole line of work on causal inference, and I'm not showing external influences here, but the connection back through Cochrane to Fisher, I think is, and also to Neyman, is evident in the work that he did in that area. Then we have, from that, propensity scores and matching as a tool for implementing the potential outcomes framework, and that's been leading to his work on reconceptualization of econometrics. And I'll mention one thing that hasn't been brought up before is that Don really took a very concerted approach to addressing the sad level of causal inference in econometrics, and one component of which was the course Econ 1127, which he developed and taught first himself and then with Guido Imbens, and which really tried to take on the notions of causality and get beyond the kind of common slap down a regression equation look at a coefficient and you've got a causal inference kind of approach to the world of causality in economics. And then principal stratification. So this is sort of a very quick look at the connection of some of his areas. And we know that Don's influence on statistical science has been huge. The topic was a little ambiguous. Science could mean more than one thing. But I'm going to try to also think of Don's impact on the larger world of science. And that includes a lot of fields in which work he's done. There's economics getting very big, psychology that he worked in, and here comes health policy tagging along with its big brother economics. So I'm going to use a quantitative measure. As we know, once you have quantitative data, you can always do statistics, even if it's junk. Citations are, to a certain extent, junk, but you may know the saying that hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. I think citations are the tribute that sometimes derivative work plays to really original work, and so they're worth looking at as an indication of where people see the important ideas is coming from. And I'm using Google Scholar, which is very comprehensive, but has a lot of duplications and ephemera. And I'm also using ISI Web of Science. That's where I got the web, which has the advantage of having subject categories. And so it gives us a little bit of an idea of the areas where the influence has been greatest. So first, missing data. And I'll take as my starting point for that inference in missing data from 1976. That didn't get a lot of citations, only 4,000. So Don got a ghostwriter to help him to write a book so that he could get it out a little more widely. And that got 15,000 citations. And this is where those citations are. Very influential book in statistics, and that's the top area, but you can go down the list, and almost every area of statistics in which, or application of statistics in which there's data are actually being collected has substantial numbers of references to this. And the list goes on. There's a long list of things in the 1% region. These are percentages of the total citation as represented in Web of Science. So it's interesting that this category of public environmental and occupational health, for example, is very high on citations to inference and missing data. It's an area where there's probably a lot of problems with that type of issue. I want to point out that a lot of people have heard about missing data, and they think they know what imputation means, that it's just a way of plugging up the holes in the data set. I think for Don, missing data has become a much broader way of thinking about the world. And there's, a lot of people think Don said this. I'm not sure he ever actually did say it this way, that every statistical problem can be formulated as a missing data problem. I interpret this as meaning that you add variables to your model and complexify your model to the extent that it's helpful, both to make it more tractable and to fully represent the structure in the process that you're looking at, and then you stop. And Albert Einstein said something similar, which is often also apocryphally paraphrased as make your models as simple as possible, but not too simple. So then we get to the EM algorithm. Of course, now you just say DLR, and you know what you're talking about. And this is the citation index. 4 citations ahead of Shelley, I think, because I did mine a little bit later. And this one is showing no signs of dying away, except in 2014. Interestingly enough, the first 2 areas here are computer science and electrical engineering. And Yin-Yang Wu was telling me about how this is, again, this is a tremendous underestimate of the influence of this article because people don't bother to cite. It's just so familiar there. And then there are extensions through a huge number of areas, many of them areas in electrical engineering and signal processing, computer science, and so forth that we don't necessarily hear about a lot. Multiple imputation was my introduction to Don. Don came to Boston in 1984. I was a grad student at MIT. I had taken a couple of years of statistics at that point, and he came over to give a seminar and introduce himself. And I thought, this stuff is really interesting. This is really powerful stuff. After 2 years of studying other kinds of statistics, it really got me very interested in what Don was doing, and I had the good fortune to be able to come over to Harvard and take courses here as a cross-registered student and become his advisee. So this is the multiple imputation article, 509 citations. This is a story which I hope Don will repeat about why this was an article in the proceedings that no one looks at until 9 years, I guess it was about 9 years later, it became a book with a huge number of citations. And this is a real underestimate because Don and other people, including some of his students, have written numerous tutorial articles about multiple imputation that have citation counts of over 1,000. So there's a public health version and there's an epidemiology version, and they're all just the same thing, just introducing this to other fields. And you now find that people who know very little about statistics will say, can we impute the missing data? So the idea is definitely out there all over science. The Bayes frequentist synthesis, I take the 1984 Annals of Article as the starting point for that. An interesting kind of citation pattern, very level over time. This is not the kind of article that people pick up and read who are not interested in getting into the philosophical issues of statistics. But nonetheless, it's had a lot of influence, and partly through the effect on posterior predictive checking. That's just an article I'd recommend you to be familiar with when you talk to people who are confused by this Bayes frequentist kind of apparent argument. I guess at some points more of a war, although not so much now. And it gives a very clear statement about how these two perspectives fit together. Causal inference, as I said, this really is picking up ideas that go back to Fisher and Neyman. And the well-known article there, I had trouble picking out one, because there are several articles around that time that developed the idea in various aspects. And this, I guess, is from your ETS days. And I don't know how often articles in the Journal of Educational Psychology have 3,000 citations, but this one is very big there. And again, it's a very important one within the field, but also look at that huge number of citations in economics. So people in economics have really been influenced to a more rigorous and less mechanical kind of view of causality. One thing I'd like to mention about this is that the approach that Don has taken of potential outcomes is very well suited to people who work in policy areas. And you'll see a lot of areas here that have a kind of a policy orientation. When you're doing policy, you don't want to know that the world is actually a big machine with gears and levers that push each other around in certain ratios. What you'd like to know is, if I do this, what's going to happen? If I do something different, what's going to happen? And that's what the potential outcomes tends to answer. So there are probably millions of pages written about what causality is, but this approach really fits with the kinds of questions that we need to know about. Finally, propensity scores and matching. Matching has become an entire kind of a cottage industry. Don and Paul Rosenbaum did this article, which I'll take as a starting point, almost 11,000 citations from 1983. Again, a huge impact on economics. So this is a kind of a pushback against the economists' kind of focus on doing regressions as a means of establishing causal relationships. And a really key idea that Don has, I think, really battled for in the process of working on these ideas has been the idea of distinguishing design from analysis and creating greater rigor by getting closer to an experimental paradigm in which you set up your study before you know how it's going to influence your answers, even if it's an observational study. So I'm going to conclude by thanking Don for his immense impact in and outside of statistics. These methods are really widely used. You say really something that's in an article in the Annals is not real practical statistics until someone's turned it into computer code. And this has happened. It's stuff that people use every day. Don has really pushed forward the rigor of the use of these methods and done everything he can to make sure that people really understand what they're doing. And we really hope that you have many more years to spend more strands onto your Rubin web of statistics. So.
Who knew that Raghu had more than one name? I didn't know that. I thought he was like Prince, the rock star, and that was his name. That was his name. So Raghu has graciously agreed to fill in for Tom Bellin, who, as I mentioned earlier, because of an illness in his family, couldn't attend. But Raghu probably should have been on this program to begin with, and so that sort of fixes an oversight here. So Raghu was an '87 graduate here. So as I said, makes me feel old because I think the course I taught was probably in '84 or so that you sat in on. I remember that course well because the Harvard Stat graduate students would appoint someone to come to class every day, and they would come and get the notes, and everybody else would just kind of hang out. So he actually has done a number of wonderful things. I think from January 2010, if I have the date right, he's been chair of the Department of Biostatistics at the School of Public Health at the University of Michigan. Rod, did he follow you in your second stint, or was there somebody in between you and Raghu?
I followed him.
You followed him. Okay, he remembers. He's fellow of the ASA. He won the Frank Wilcoxon Award from Technometrics for a best paper, many other awards along the way, and has well over 200 peer-reviewed publications. So Raghu, let's cue up the slides here.
I'm glad that I got this opportunity, and I'm a kind of a weird student of Don. When I came to Harvard, I had absolutely no knowledge about computing. And so whatever I did, I kind of expanded everything in a series, in a diminishing way, so that I can do hand calculations. So I was very keen on Bessel functions of the first kind, Bessel functions of the second kind. So he thought that was very weird, that I don't know much about computing. And he also was weird that I was a vegetarian, so he always kidded me about the rabbit food. And what sort of rabbit food can you eat? And can you eat grass? And can you eat this? And then also, I think, coming from a Eastern philosophy view, I think I had sort of a strange sort of expectations or a strange kind of a view. So it was probably my father who ingrained a lot of things in me, in the sense that your view of life should really be same as your way of life, and view of life and way of life. And so we used to have a lot of interesting philosophical discussions. And I was delighted to receive Tom's slides, where it also exhibited similar kind of a philosophical discussion. So I thought that maybe I'm not that weird student anymore, that weird a student. But I think I'm still, so I'm grateful that I got this opportunity to talk. And then I'm going to really talk from Tom's slide. I'm going to try as much as possible to keep Tom's theme, but then I will add some of my own. So it is kind of as a philosophical voice, throughout the period of our interactions, through his publications, through our interactions, all the students have developed a philosophy. And that I think I would like to hope that it will come out of this presentation, that kind of what it is not just statistics, it is also about the life lessons of using statistics in a particular way. So, first of all, is Don Rubin a philosophical guy? So Tom writes that I was talking with a Harvard faculty colleague, and he commented that because he has appointments in 3 schools at Harvard, he answers directly to Derek Bok, who was the president at that time. And I thought it was so strange, this is Don's thing, that doesn't he realize that we all answer to God? And I didn't, at that time, I didn't quiz whether Derek Bok thought, what's the difference? So I think, philosophy, somehow I think God and philosophy are linked. So I think this one shows that I think, yes, Don is a philosophical guy in that sense. But the most important aspect of this is that the human condition induces the ethical imperatives on the scientific enterprise. So this shows up frequently. I think some of the examples that we talked about in the tobacco comes up here. So here is a quote from his 1983 book chapter. It says, "Statisticians have an obligation to provide the kinds of answers clients will assume are being provided." So the part of the appeal of the Bayesian methods is sort of that of giving a right answer or an answer to the problems that the scientific questions are being asked about. So, and that's the simplicity of that cognitive aspect, the tendency of the clients to interpret the interval estimates as the Bayesian HPD intervals. If that is the case, then I think statisticians are obligated to give the answers that clients are looking for. So this sort of emphasizes, in a sense, that I think the philosophy of the statisticians is to really to understand the problem and then try to answer the questions that they would understand. And I think this also the work on tobacco aspect is another illustration of that. Is a bad science is good means of doing bad to bad people, right? So it's really, I think, or should one only be worried about the good science part of it? And as a scientist, we should be only looking at the good science part of it, and we should be defending good science, and we should be objecting to bad science, regardless of what context it is being applied. So, I and Don went through this many times. I helped in some of those analyses that he was doing, and it coming from a public health perspective, it raises a lot of issues in terms of whether what you are you defending the tobacco companies? And I think the conclusion was that no, we are not defending the tobacco companies, but actually we are defending good science. And I think I don't think that one should take the bad science as a means for doing, even though the ultimate results could be good for the society, or it may be a justified action for the society. That's a danger of using a bad science to go into that aspect. So I think that aspect of it was very powerful in the interactions, and that builds at the philosophy of, as a scientist, we should really be working only with the good science and get a detachment from the aspect of that implication aspect. But that's very hard to do in this socio-cultural, political field. But I think as a good scientist, I think the lessons that we learn is that no, I think we have to be a good science, regardless of what context it is being applied. I think that was a great lesson that we got. So another question that Tom poses is that when is the analysis too Bayesian? And one would think that I think that Don is not a very dogmatic person, so he really uses the Bayesian framework to answer the questions, but also he has the validity of the frequentist aspects of calculations as well. He understands that. So in that, in the 1994 discussion, it says that, so what is the answer is a true Bayesian when there is no way to check its validity, right? So in that, in the nice article in 1994 JSM discussion, that where what statistics would serve as a basis for monitoring the validity of the prior distribution across different models. So how can we even compare the prior distributions in that context? So I think that is the one thing. There is no way to check the validity of that kind of viewpoint. I think so. I think that's analysis. So I think that one aspect of that is that the philosophy is that it's not that we write down the model and we do the Bayesian mechanisms. At the back of the mind, we always have this thought of that: is this model? Can I justify this model? And can I weigh in a way that I can validate these model assumptions? So it's kind of a very important aspect of a philosophy of science in that perspective. Don has a very particular aspects of giving credit where it is due, and he really strictly follows this principle of first come, first served, even though it may be a really horrible use of that particular word, good word for a bad occasion. So, for example, he always talks about this informative. Now, I think there are so many in the missing data literature, I think, although we have all these terminologies in 1976, most highly cited paper has been so well articulated, but still we have all these other things comes about the informative missingness and so on and so forth. And I think that he's very stickler for that kind of making sure that the words mean something, and then whatever the word has been used to first come, and it should be honored. For example, unbiased estimate is one example, which is kind of even sometimes it might lead us to a ridiculous situation, but it has been used by the frequentist in that particular context, and hence they have a claim to that term. And similarly, I think the missing at random, missing completely at random, those kinds of terminologies comes completely from a design of experiment. When I heard about those things, I just related exactly to this, because I was so much into the design of experiments, is that, oh yeah, completely randomized design, randomized block designs, so I could relate to those terminologies. So it's also very much important. He thinks about the resource constraints, and then that really leads you to think about what is the most important aspect that you need to do. So this is an example that Tom Bellin talks about, is that there is a piece of software for students, once for a computer lab. It only costs $25. I don't care where the money where the money for it comes from. And Don Rubin, as the department said, I do. And it's not the money. Money does not grow on trees. Resources constrain the induction of the induce of imperatives. So this reminds me of another story. I was I had an office on the opposite floor of the, opposite of this elevator on the 7th floor. It was not developed this well, but I think it was just a dark, dingy room at that time. And I was typing, and he was looking at my computer screen and was typing. And I'm a two-finger typist. And he looked at me and he said, "Are you planning to type your thesis?" And I said, "Yes." And he looked at me, he says, he ran. I said, "What happened?" So Jill Callahan was the secretary. She came running. And Don said that, "I'm going to type your thesis." And that's great. And it was a great resource that he gave me. But also then I thought, maybe I think he was smart in investing. Because maybe I would have still be there typing my thesis with my two fingers. So instead of supporting me for 25 years, I thought that it may be a good investment to make. So I think he's a very good teacher of life lessons in those particular way. So this slide, this is we used to have this psychology lunch, and I don't know whether you still have those psychology lunch, where the students from the psychology, from Stat department used to go to psychology brown bag, and then we used to have the interactions, and then many of the papers, I think Zhaoli mentioned one paper, and I also got another paper in those kinds of thing. And it's really, I think, in those, you cannot answer all the questions, in a very clean way. So here is an example, is that he gave an example of simultaneously true that the green people have a higher reward salary on average than the blue people with the same merit experience. So they're considering regression of Y on X and green versus blue. And the blue people have a greater merit / per experience for the same salary, considering the reverse regression of X on Y. And all the consequences you can have is of the imperfect relationship between merit and award. And I think, and then his advice was to draw the distinction where there are important distinctions to be drawn. Otherwise, then you just live with it, and then you be happy with what you are getting and do the work that you should be doing. So here, as another example that Tom gives is that he was with a very formidable team. So he was with Zhaoli and Andrew Gelman. So it must be really, I think, a tough thing. I think he says that it was a tough thing, but I think that Tom is really great. So I don't believe any of those words that he said. So he got a 9.5 out of 10. So he went, of course, Tom was a very bold guy, so he would go ask any question. So he says, "Why did I get only 9.5 out of 10? And Don Rubin, because at one point, Zhaoli's solution to the problem, he wrote, "Of course, this is obvious from a Bayesian perspective." And therefore, he got 10 out of 10. And Tom Ben, I see. So he says that, his answer was better than mine. Not saying anything wrong is not same as good as possible.
I think I gave him the other exam to see if he agreed.
Yes.
Tom did.
Yeah.
But he was thankful that he got 9.5.
Yeah. So this is another example. I think this came, we had a lot of discussion about this when I was in Seattle about measure of quality adjusted life years in a health services setting. And so there's always a problem of what do you do with the death? And they always put death as a worst case scenario. So they give they have a 0 to 100 scale, so death as 100. And so Don has a very nice paper to think about the life lessons. Is that should we really be thinking about death as the worst situation, or is it really the one should really think about the death may be a better condition than some of the other conditions. So we had a paper based on that published in Epidemiology, where we talked about the declining health versus steady health and then death. And then we scored steady health and death as much better than declining death, and then made a relationship between those aspects as well. So this is another example. I think I was just curious to see this in Tom Bellin's write-up. So do you believe potential outcomes exist in people as a fixed quantities, or is the notion that the potential outcomes are fixed a device to facilitate causal inference? So he says, definitely latter. Among other things, a person's potential outcomes could change over time, and how do we know the people who were studied in the past are still exchangeable with people today? But there are lots of devices like that in science. So I think this potential outcome frameworks really is such a great framework for understanding the causal inference. I think that in some sense, I think it is, since you can't get these two things simultaneously, so this framing of all the causal inference from a potential outcome framework is a really a great way of philosophically viewing the problem. So in terms of his own philosophical aspect, actually it is that a phenomenological Bayesian perspective is a word appears in so many of these, in his key work on the multiple imputation and sample service. So from Wikipedia, it says that a philosophical movement that aims through systematic reflection to determine the essential properties and structures of experience. And really, I think this is all his work, as indicated by Alan and others, is a lesson in philosophical view of a particular viewpoint, in a sense that of viewing a scientific problem in that particular fashion. So as in other contexts, I think this Bayesian methodology, some of them have been embraced, and in Rubin's 1978 paper, it says a characterization of essential features, and some that did not. So we have to accept them. So Tom Bellin in 2003, it seems, asked the question: the appeal of a potential outcomes perspective was clearly revealed through mid-1990s work on instrumental variables that led to insight on principal stratification. What was it in the 1970s that made a potential outcomes framework seem so appealing? Answer: true, that instrumental variables principal stratification work reveals biggest advantage of potential outcome framework, but part of the motivation grew out of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in physics and the idea that you can be in two places at once. And that's really crystallizes the sort of the counterfactual, factual, and potential outcome framework, and how he transformed many of these ideas that we knew some of these things, but I think crystallizing them requires enormous capacity to philosophically think about these issues. And as you see, I think when this touches off on many of us students, I think we all borrow a lot of these philosophical aspects throughout our work. And this has been really a great contribution of Don, in that I think he has rubbed off this deep philosophical perspective of science. And thank you, Don, for all you have done to teach us, enrich us, guide us, and know how proud we are to have you in our lives. Thank you.